The key slid into the lock, a familiar weight, a familiar click. But the door did not open. He tried again. Nothing. It was then, standing on his own doorstep, that the true silence began, heavier than any noise. The silence of a world that had moved on, leaving him behind. The silence of a life he once believed was unshakable, now irrevocably locked away.
For years, Julian Vance had cultivated an image of effortless opulence, a meticulously constructed reality beamed across millions of screens. His Instagram feed was a mosaic of private jets, infinity pools overlooking sapphire coastlines, and bespoke suits tailored to perfection. He was the quintessential modern millionaire, a self-made titan of taste, an arbiter of aspiration.
His followers, a vast digital congregation, saw in him the embodiment of success, a blueprint for the life they too could achieve if only they worked hard enough, if only they believed enough. Each post, each story, each carefully choreographed video reinforced the narrative. Julian Vance lived in a perpetual golden hour, bathed in the glow of his own prosperity. His penthouse apartment, with its sweeping views of the city skyline, was not just a home, it was a stage.
The vintage Porsche, gleaming under the California sun, was not just transport, it was a prop. Every designer watch, every exclusive dinner, every exotic vacation was an act of performance, a carefully calculated investment in the illusion. He moved through life with the confidence of someone who had cracked the code, who understood the subtle alchemy of influence.
Brand deals flowed in, each contract seemingly validating his perceived worth. Event organizers vied for his presence, offering lavish sums for a mere appearance, a fleeting endorsement. His family, his elegant wife, Isabella, and their two bright children were extensions of this perfect picture, their laughter ringing harmoniously in staged family moments, their smiles mirroring his own, reflecting a life of boundless joy. He truly believed for a time that he was living the dream. The accolades, the public adoration, the sheer volume of his influence, it all felt real.
It had to be real, because so many people believed it. This belief was his fortress, built not on concrete, but on likes, shares, and fleeting digital praise. Yet, behind the polished veneer, a different reality was taking hold, subtle at first, then increasingly urgent. The first crack appeared not in his perfectly white walls, but in the crisp silence of a bank statement. A series of rejected transactions, initially dismissed as minor glitches, became a pattern.
The carefully managed finances, a complex web of loans, credit lines, and deferred payments, began to fray at the edges. Julian had leveraged everything against his future earnings, against the promise of ever-growing influence. He borrowed from Peter to pay Paul, then borrowed from a new Paul to pay the original Peter. Each new piece of luxury, each grand gesture, each investment in his image was financed with a deeper plunge into debt.
The private jet was chartered, the mansion rented for photo shoots, the luxury cars leased with crippling monthly payments. He was a maestro of financial theatrics, meticulously arranging the scenery while the stage beneath him slowly eroded. The pressure mounted with each passing day. The fleeting high of a successful post was quickly replaced by the cold dread of an upcoming payment.
He started avoiding calls from his financial advisor, letting them go to voicemail, the vibrations a silent accusation in his pocket. Isabella, with her discerning eye, began to notice small discrepancies. A sudden hesitation when paying for a family dinner, a tense phone call he would abruptly end when she entered the room, the way his gaze would flicker nervously when discussing their financial future.
She would ask, gently, if everything was all right. He would dismiss her concerns with a practiced smile, a wave of his hand. Just business, darling. Big things are happening. He repeated these reassurances so often that he almost believed them himself. The performance extended beyond the screen, seeping into the most intimate corners of his life. turning his own family into an unwitting audience.
The facade, though meticulously maintained, began to develop more visible fissures. A major brand deal, one that was supposed to solve his immediate financial crunch, unexpectedly fell through. The company, citing unforeseen internal restructuring, quietly withdrew their offer. Julian had already spent the anticipated advance, funding another extravagant trip to a private island for content creation.
The sudden loss sent a tremor through his already precarious financial structure. He tried to hide the panic, the gnawing anxiety, but it was a heavy cloak, suffocating him. He grew more irritable, his once charming demeanor replaced by a fragile defensiveness. He spent more time alone, hunched over his laptop late into the night, chasing phantom opportunities, trying to conjure new revenue streams out of thin air.
The digital world that had once been his playground now felt like a relentless taskmaster, demanding more, always more. The next crack was a quiet, almost imperceptible whisper. Then, a shout. A financial journalist, driven by a growing skepticism about the seemingly effortless wealth of online personalities, began to scrutinize Julian's public filings and investment portfolios.
What they found was a disturbing lack of substance, a house of cards built on borrowed credit and inflated projections. The article, published on a reputable but niche financial news site, didn't go viral immediately, but it planted a seed of doubt. Then came the anonymous tip-off, likely from a disgruntled former associate or a keen-eyed analyst, detailing the full extent of his leverage and the precariousness of his position.
The information found its way to a prominent gossip blog, notorious for exposing celebrity secrets. Suddenly, the whispers turned into a roar. The headline screamed, "Influencer millionaire Julian Vance, a house of debt?" The public reaction was swift and brutal. The comment section of the blog post exploded, a venomous cascade of outrage and betrayal. "I trusted him. It was all a lie. He played us for fools."
His perfectly curated Instagram feed, once a beacon of aspiration, transformed overnight into a battleground. Each perfect photo was dissected, mocked, and scorned. The private jet was now a symbol of his deceit, the infinity pool a monument to his vanity. The carefully constructed reality shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, revealing the desperate, hollow core beneath. Sponsors, already wary, began to sever ties.
Emails arrived with alarming frequency, notifying him of contract terminations, partnership cancellations, and demands for refunds of advanced payments. The phone, once a conduit for opportunity, became a source of dread. Every ring was a harbinger of more bad news, another client pulling out, another creditor demanding payment. The irreversible event came in the form of a formal notice from the bank, a recall of a significant business loan, due immediately.
The terms of the loan were tied to his net worth, which, thanks to the public revelations and the exodus of his sponsors, had plummeted. There was no way to repay it. Bankruptcy was no longer a distant threat, but an imminent reality. The paperwork arrived in a thick envelope, stamped with the ominous insignia of a law firm. He held it in his hands, feeling the weight of his unraveling world. The beautiful penthouse, the one he had showcased so proudly, was no longer his. The lease was terminated, the cars repossessed.
The meticulously maintained image of a life without limits dissolved into the stark reality of financial ruin. Isabella had watched the disintegration with a quiet, growing horror. She tried to understand, to forgive, but the layers of deceit were too deep, the betrayal too profound. The man she married, the father of her children, had built their entire existence on a foundation of sand.
The children, still young, sensed the shift in the atmosphere, the hushed conversations, the sudden absence of the lavish lifestyle they had known. Their questions were innocent, but Julian couldn't bear to answer them. He saw in Isabella's eyes not anger, but a profound sadness, a knowing disappointment that cut deeper than any public condemnation. One morning, after a long, silent night, she sat him down.
Her voice was calm, almost detached, as she explained that she could no longer live in this uncertainty, this constant performance. She deserved honesty, and their children deserved stability. She packed 2 suitcases for herself and the children, the silence in the apartment amplifying the finality of her decision. The door closed, not with a bang, but with a soft, definitive click, mirroring the one that had refused to open for him later.
He was left alone in the echoing emptiness of the apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of his fabricated life. The internal collapse was not a sudden explosion of emotion, but a slow, suffocating implosion. The days that followed were a blur of grief and shame. He found himself wandering the city streets, an anonymous figure in a crowd that once knew his face, his name.
The sleek designer clothes were replaced by generic, comfortable attire, an attempt to disappear. The silence of his phone, once dreaded, became a grim comfort. There was no one left to call, no one left to disappoint. He rented a small, nondescript room in a shared house on the outskirts of the city, a stark contrast to the panoramic views he once flaunted. The mirror reflected a stranger, hollow eyes, a gaunt face, the carefully cultivated charisma replaced by a weariness that permeated his very being.
He would sit for hours, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, replaying every decision, every lie, every moment he chose image over integrity. The weight of his past pressed down on him, a crushing burden that stripped away his identity. He was no longer Julian Vance, the influencer, the millionaire. He was just Julian, a man adrift, utterly alone. The ego, once boundless, had been systematically dismantled, leaving behind a raw, vulnerable core.
The subsequent months were a period of restrained, almost involuntary transformation. With no assets, no income, and a tarnished reputation, Julian was forced to confront the most basic necessities of survival. He applied for jobs he once would have scoffed at, submitting applications under a modified name, hoping to avoid recognition.
Rejection after rejection came, some subtle, others explicitly citing his past controversies. Desperation led him to accept a role as a delivery driver for a food service app. The irony was not lost on him. He, who once flew first class across continents, now navigated suburban streets on a cheap bicycle, delivering meals to strangers. The uniform was ill-fitting, the work arduous, the pay meager. Each drop-off felt like a small act of atonement, a humbling reminder of his fall.
There was no glamour here, no adoring audience, only the ticking clock of delivery times and the occasional impatient customer. He learned to appreciate the quiet dignity of honest labor, the simple satisfaction of earning $1 through effort, not illusion. He spoke little, kept his head down, and meticulously avoided eye contact, especially when delivering to affluent neighborhoods that reminded him too much of his former life.
The shame was a constant companion, but it was slowly being tempered by the quiet rhythm of his new reality, the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. One late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the street, Julian pulled up to a familiar address, a large, modern house surrounded by manicured lawns. As he dismounted from his bicycle, carefully balancing the delivery bag, the front door swung open. A young man, no older than 20, with a phone already in hand, stepped out. Their eyes met.
For a moment, there was a flicker of confusion in the young man's gaze, a slow dawning of recognition. Julian felt his stomach clench. He knew that look. It was the look of someone trying to place a face they had seen countless times, but never in this context. The young man's eyes widened, a smirk playing on his lips. His phone, which had been idly recording, was suddenly aimed directly at Julian. "No way," the young man muttered, his voice just loud enough to carry across the porch. "Is that Julian Vance?
The millionaire influencer? Julian's breath caught in his throat. He offered the delivery bag, his hand trembling slightly. He tried to keep his voice steady, to maintain a shred of dignity. "Your order, sir." But the young man was no longer interested in the food. His friend emerged from the house, drawn by the commotion. "Dude, look! It's that guy! The fake rich dude!"
Laughter erupted, sharp and derisive. The phone camera zoomed in, capturing Julian's face, the delivery uniform, the bicycle. "What happened, Julian? No private jet today?" "Delivering my pad thai now?" The words, laced with malicious glee, sliced through the quiet evening air. The friend leaned in, whispering loudly for the camera. "Remember how he used to flex all those cars? Now he's on a bike." The laughter grew louder, echoing in the twilight.
Julian stood there, frozen, the delivery bag still in his hand, the hot food growing cold. He felt the sting of humiliation, raw and inescapable. He was a spectacle once more, but this time the performance was not of his choosing. He was the subject of ridicule, exposed, stripped bare, his downfall a source of cheap entertainment. He handed over the bag, mumbled a barely audible, "Enjoy your meal," and turned, pushing the bike away, the sound of their laughter following him down the street, clinging to his back like a physical burden.
The road ahead remained long, shadowed by the ghosts of what once was and what never truly was. What does it mean in this age of curated lives and digital aspirations to build a world based solely on perception? What is the true cost of chasing an image, of allowing the external validation of strangers to dictate one's internal worth?
The laughter eventually faded, but the echoes lingered, not as a reminder of shame, but as a chilling question about the foundations of our desires and the fragile line between ambition and illusion.